Okay, let's see. I don't know if this is going any better. I just, well, I got to go back here and I got to just check something real quick. Okay, so this says my stream is healthy. So this must be an issue with this over here. I'm gonna this is what happens when you have no clue what you're doing. Yeah, it says my stream is excellent on the YouTube side, and I don't know why. My program seems to be, I'm going to change one more setting. And we'll just go with it. Yeah, now I got another error, so I don't know what's going on. Now it's back to poor quality again. There must be. I don't know, it seems better. It still says I have poor quality, but what I did is I usually have my internet hardwired into my PC and have it going like that. I mean, this looks like everything's moving better here, but on the YouTube side, it still says poor quality. So yeah, so what I did is I just unplugged my Ethernet cord cable and just am on wireless now. And it doesn't seem like my program's choppy, and it seems like the video is going through okay on the playback. So I'm just gonna go ahead and go with it, and whatever happens, happens. Like I said, I really wasn't planning on doing one this morning. I just got up early and I just came out here in the garage and I just set everything up, and I wanted to mess with some settings and stuff like that. And then I was like, man, it's so early. I just said, I'm just gonna go ahead and go live. It's kind of a little different day for us too today. We usually have our grandbaby on Saturdays where we babysit him, or not babysit him, but we get our day with him to watch him and stuff. So, you know, my son and his wife can have, you know, a day at home cleaning and, you know, unbothered. But they changed it to today because they did something yesterday. you know, which is fine. We just enjoy being able to spend time with our grandbaby. So I did a live yesterday at my mow, and you know, I'm doing a couple of different things with my lives and my mow, as far as setting up, you know, multi-camera, you know, just GoPro, you know, all these different types of things. You know, I was actually thinking of doing a vertical live with it as well, but something happened yesterday. You know, I have a neighbor that had been asking me to do their lawn renovation, and I talked about this a little yesterday on my live, and I gave them a bid, you know, because I had to do all the costing on it for all the materials and stuff like that. It's a huge yard, and you know, they just asked me, you know, how much is something like this going to cost? And I'm pretty much doing it for cost. I added some labor cost in there because I do have to have someone help me, and I'm going to need to pay him. So I did, you know, minimal cost on labor, and it's like 4,500 square feet, 5,000 square feet, and it's huge. It's kind of sloped. It's on a hill. It's going to be a real challenge for me as far as yard renovations go. So I'm going to document it. I'm going to keep track of everything I'm doing. I actually went over there yesterday and, you know, confirmed everything with them. You know, made a payment arrangement. I'm not expecting them to pay everything up front, but you know, I got to order materials and all that. I mean, we need 28 cubic yards of dirt. Yeah, that's a lot of dirt. That's like 3 truckloads. And I'm only, you know, planning on putting like a depth of about 2 inches down on their yard, and it's probably not even enough to put 2 inches because there's a couple of spots they have, since it's kind of hilly and sloped. They have an area where it's ponding right now because it just kind of comes into a bowl. So I'm going to try to fix that and level that out for them. But my biggest concern about it is washout. So I'm really interested to see how that project goes. But so I kind of did something stupid yesterday because I went over there and I got started on the project, and I doing a total kill off, killing moss, killing all the grass, all the weeds, all the everything. Gonna, you know, dethatch it and verticut it, you know, get it back to pretty much soil. We've had a couple of nice days. It's been really dry, so because it's been dry, I wanted to get right on it and get it started because our soil temps are kind of doing really good right now. You know, at night they're getting into the high 40s. During the day they're getting up to like 65, and that's one of the things I wanted to talk about because I want to continue my conversation with going, you know, deeper dive into these topics I've been talking about, you know, like CEC, soil test, you know, nitrogen, pH, and all these kinds of things, because I want to help everybody understand where the importance of some of these things are, why knowing some of these things are really important, you know, why soil temps are kind of important. And, you know, I talked about this whole thing about, you know, your yard waking up and stuff like that, and how I really just hate that term. I mean, it's fine. I mean, people use it. People say, "Oh, your yard's waking up" and all that kind of stuff. But you know, the reality, you know, and I know it's just a term that people are using to say, "Hey, your grass is coming out of dormancy and starting to come alive." And that's really what's happening. Is your soil is coming alive. There is a temperature range where the microbes become active. You know, they become inactive in the wintertime. You know, when the temperatures come down, they stop moving around, they stop processing, you know, they stop just doing what they do. You know, microbes are the biggest part of plant life. You know, any plant, whether it's grass, plants, flowers, vegetables, you know, an active soil is really, really important. But as we dive deeper into it, can you really increase your microbe population using products like amino acids and you know, those sorts of things? There's a couple of different products out there that they talk about, you know, being able to increase your microbe population, or feed your microbes, molasses and all these kinds of stuff. There's one YouTube guy in general, that he talks about making his microbes more microbe, and I don't even know what that means, but it's pretty much an impossibility. It's not going to happen. It doesn't happen. There are ways to have a healthy microbe population and keep them very active and going, but you have so many microbes in just a small amount of soil that it's crazy. They're active and they're doing their thing, and they're doing what needs to be done. But increasing the populations, bugs in a jug and all these sorts of things, do they really work? Research says no. And I'm going to dive deeper into that a little bit in this video, but as I'm doing the research on it and I'm looking up the topics, and I'm going to researchers that have done research on these kinds of things and all that stuff, my reality is I'm trying to figure out why people are telling us to buy all these products and spend all this money on our yards, telling us they're going to make it better. It's kind of like that whole philosophy of how a lot of these YouTubers are like, this is what I do to my lawn. Look at my lawn. This is what I do to my lawn. Look at my lawn. That doesn't matter, because just because you do this and you add this fertilizer, there may be only one thing in a bottle of fertilizer or a bag of fertilizer that makes your yard look green, and there probably is only one thing, maybe two. But the reality is just because somebody puts down a bottle of whatever nutrient product and they have great results from it, what's given the results? That's where I'm at with trying to understand turf grass, and growing grass. I've always wanted to have my own lawn care business, but I'm just not a business owner type of person. I like to go to work. I like somebody else to have to do all the BS to get everything going. And I just want to collect my paycheck, and I want to go home and I want to do what I want to do. The older I get, the more and more I'm starting to really want to do this. And when these neighbors asked me to do their yard, I really wanted to do it, but I was afraid because of how big their yard is and the amount of money it's going to cost just in materials. I really was afraid it was going to be too much. And I'm really excited to actually go over and do this job. And they live in a part of the neighborhood that's a little bit more higher end. They've got some really great views. They're high up on the hill in our neighborhood, and their house is actually, I think, like the tip-top house up there. And they have 360 views of the entire South Sound area, Tacoma, Mount Rainier. You can see Seattle and the sound and the water. You can see everything from their house, and it's really, really great. But also what's really great is they're in a neighborhood where there's a lot of terrible yards. And maybe from doing this yard and hoping it turns out really great, some people will have some interest, and maybe a couple more people will want to do some yards and stuff like that. And that's all I'm looking to do. Is I'm looking to just get a couple of jobs, to help some people out, make their yards look good, make the neighborhood look good, because that's what it's all about. On a big job, yeah, there's going to be some costs involved. It's going to take some money. One of the things that I didn't set up that I wanted to talk about, though, is you can use Google Maps to do measure your yard. I've found it's easiest on a PC to do this, but you can use Google Maps and the measure tool that they have on there, and you can basically square out your yard with it by adding points. And what it's going to do is it's going to measure how many feet it is in length that you're measuring, but it's also going to tell you how many square feet. And this is the tool I used in doing the estimate for how much material we're going to need, like seed and soil, and I'm going to do some soil amendment. I believe they have a low pH soil, and that was something I wanted to start I wanted to actually do a live pH test on their soil, because I've talked about pH and low pH in this area being a big factor in moss. And although they have some shaded areas that definitely are covered in moss, they also have some areas that just direct sunlight constantly beating down on it all day long, and they have moss there. So that right there kind of leads me to believe that they may have a pH problem. And I started talking to them about it and told them, you know, what I'm going to try to do to help them to fix this problem and get them going. So they actually want me to maintain the yard after it comes in and it's done. What I did is we basically made an agreement. We have a written agreement, and I agree to do everything I can do to make the yard grow in full and look great. I'm planning on it taking 2 months after seeding. I want to just work with it, you know, fill in I'm sure there's going to be some areas that are going to run off, going to get some wash away and all this kind of stuff. But I'm going to use perennial rye. And I'm going to use perennial rye because it grows so quick. And I told them that I was going to use perennial rye, and this is why I was going to use it. And, you know, she talked to me about putting a putting green in and all that kind of stuff. And I told her we could, but we're going to have to do a little bit more work on doing that. So maybe let's see how we get this going here, because she only wants like a 10 by 10. She wants a really small little putting green. And, you know, this couple, they're older and all that. And it's actually their son's house, but he's in Korea and works in Korea. His parents live here. So I may be looking at doing an additional putting green for them and taking care of that putting green, because they're asking me to actually maintain their yard for them. So that's how that's going to continue on and work on. So enough about that. I just wanted to talk about the fact that using Google Maps, if you want to do a yard renovation, it's a really good tool, so you don't got to get out there with a tape measure and, you know, have somebody helping you. I mean, I only have a 25-foot tape measure, you know, and it's really hard to measure, you know, hundreds of feet in length or width or whatever with a tape measure. If you saw my live last week, I didn't do any new videos. I've been really busy this week. I wasn't planning on yesterday going the way it went. The one thing I was going to talk about though, so I went over there yesterday and I sprayed their yard to kill it, glyphosate. And I was spraying it and I was using a really good concentration. You know, when you get a bottle of glyphosate from the farm supply store or wherever you get it from, it's like 42 or something like that, 42% glyphosate. In the instructions, it gives you a concentration mixing chart, you know, per gallon, or, you know, different, you know, levels and stuff. So I mix it at about a 5%, which is like the third concentration level that they have on there. And it's like 6 ounces per gallon. So I was doing all the glyphosate. I was spraying the lawn. I'm just going along, fat, dumb, and happy, like I always do when I'm spraying. You know, I have my electric spray or my battery pack sprayer. I have 3 of them. I only use 2, but I use one for chemicals and I use one for nutrients. So I was spraying and I got all done, and I came home and I cleaned up all the stuff and I took, you know, got everything done, and I was kind of looking at my grass and I just kind of noticed a little something in my grass, and I went over and walked in it. And the last time I did this, when I did Doug's yard across the street, when I had sprayed it with glyphosate, you know, I had glyphosate on my shoes. Now, hopefully I'm lucky, and because the grass wasn't wet, it's not going to affect it. But I walked in a very small part of my lawn, but part of it was my putting green. And I probably had some glyphosate on my shoes. I knew in my mind I need to change my shoes when I get home, or I need to wash them off, I need to do all that stuff. And I don't know what's going to happen now. I'm hoping I don't get more footprints in my lawn killing grass. That happened last year. In September of last year, or late August last year, I did Doug's yard and I sprayed it. And after I'd sprayed it, I had immediately walked in my yard and was looking at some I don't know what I was looking at. I'd walk through the yard and you could literally see, 3 weeks later, my footprints of dead grass in my yard, and they were like exact perfect footprints that glyphosate was still on my shoes. The grass was probably a little wet from being watered or something, and my footprints were embedded in my grass as dead grass. So that was great. So now I'm concerned that's going to happen with my grass again. I'm not afraid, but I'm only afraid because that just means, I'm going to have to take care of it. I've talked about, I don't mind damaging my lawn, because I feel like the more I damage it, or the more I have an area to work on to fix, the more it is going to give me a learning experience. What are the ways that, my grass is going to fix itself? I have Kentucky bluegrass, so Kentucky bluegrass is self-repairing, they say, like Bermuda grass, because it has rhizomes and stolons and all that stuff, and it runs, and it's a very shallow rooted grass. And those are some of the reasons why I'm talking about the different topics I'm talking about this time of year: CEC, pH, and watering. And the watering part of it is different root depths. You're going to hear people tell you about frequent watering, infrequent watering, deep watering, all that kind of stuff, all these different things that are going to help you. But is it really good? For Kentucky bluegrass, it's not. It's actually not good for Kentucky bluegrass at all. So I do a frequent light watering, especially when it's hot. And one of the things I'm going to talk about that I have up on here is one of my favorite topics last year: evapotranspiration. So in this map here, and I just, because there's nothing really going on, you can see, you can see down here in Texas, of course, and Arizona, you've got some yellow and some orange and stuff like that. That's telling you that it is, they have evapotranspiration going on. Evaporation and transpiration. It's when the moisture is not only evaporating, but the plant is transpiring the moisture out of it. And one of the biggest things that I talk about with knowing this and just using this map right here is you're going to want to water a little extra. A lot of people talk about watering 70 or 80% of evapotranspiration, which is meaning if, say, the evapotranspiration for the week is going to be 1 inch, it's basically, 1 inch of moisture is being not only evaporated but transpired out of the plant. So you're losing that. So you need to water a little bit more to take care of that, to add that water back in. Now, when you're managing Kentucky bluegrass, kind of important, because you just have the roots that are so shallow that the water and the moisture in that level of the soil is going to definitely evaporate, and the plant's going to transpire more moisture. So you need to add more water. With like a tall fescue, tall fescue, I believe, has the deepest roots. They go, I've seen some articles talking about it saying 3 to 6 feet. I don't even know how that's possible, but I guess it is. I don't know. But tall fescue is probably the only grass that you're going to want to maybe do a deep and infrequent, especially during the heat, to get the moisture down to the deeper roots and hopefully not have it evaporate out. But the reality is the research says frequent and light watering is better, and you get better turf grass results from it by about 80%. Yeah. Sorry, I made a fresh cup of coffee before I came out here, and I just didn't want to get too cold. So, I'm not trying to make a big argument about, what's right, what's wrong. You can do what you need to do. But a lot of the things I talk about is research, and I'm just talking about research. And what does the research say? There's two recent papers on it, and the actual paper that talks about where this whole deep and infrequent watering method comes from is actually from I believe it was a 1949 research paper done by some really well-known and well-respected, soil scientists. But there was some discrepancies in how they did their research, and the results of that research kind of became not law, but just became the standard. And because of that, that's what the thought is that everybody has. Not everybody has tall fescue, and that's probably one of the only grasses that it really works well for, or could work well for. Bermuda grass, I'm not really familiar with it. I have some Bermuda grass in my backyard. I have that project that I've been doing. I put it in last year, and Bermuda grass is, stolons and, rhizomes and all that, it's a ground crawling, grass. So, I'm interested to find out, how it deals with heat. Last year I was basically just doing a grow in, and I was trying to get it growing. Now this year I've got it growing. I've killed all the winter weeds that grew into it, and I'm maintaining the edge really well, and my border trick has been working. It hasn't creeped over into my Kentucky bluegrass. I mean, I had a couple of spots where it did a little bit, but a lot of that might be from mowing, because when the grass blades get kicked up, they get kicked over into my other grass and get growing. But for the most part, I'm containing it to a really small area, because Kentucky bluegrass really doesn't grow in Western Washington. I just have a really small area that I'm doing it with, and it's probably the best area I have to do it, where it gets the most sun, but part of it does get a lot of shade still. So it's just my project. It's just something I wanted to do. It's Bermuda grass. I don't really necessarily care for Bermuda grass because of the dormancy it goes through in the winter. I mean, it checked out in October of last year, and it probably is not going to check back in until I'm going to say May. I think last year that was when it had started really kind of coming in green. But we've got some warm days coming ahead, and this is one of the reasons why that yard project I'm working on, I wanted to jump in and get it started, because I want to get it going as early as possible this season, so that it's looking nice for them, once the weather gets nice. Temperatures are definitely looking on the bright side here for the next month or so. Looks like they're going to continue to get better and better and increase, which means the soil temperatures are going to go up. I've already been measuring soil temperatures in the low 50s to high 60s or mid 60s. So the soil temps are going, and with that, that means the microbes are going. So let's go ahead and let me just change this. I'll put this on right here. So let's talk about microbes. They don't just turn on, they ramp up with temperature. So, think of it like a dimmer switch. It's not an on-off switch. Its keys are temperature. And what you want to know is the temperature ranges and how they affect the microbes and how they're going to react to soil temperatures. So below 40 degrees, of course, microbial activity is very low. Decomposition is minimal. Nitrogen cycling basically stalled out. Nothing's happening. The lawn is basically not growing, inactive. Now, once you start getting above 40, between 40 and 50 degrees, microbes will start becoming active real slowly. They'll start doing some nitrification. Root activity will start with the turf grass. So in early spring or late fall, between 50 and 65 degrees, the microbes are active. The organic matter breaks down, it's increasing its breakdown, nitrogen becomes more available. And this is when your lawn is going to really start responding to fertilizer. So that's kind of the area you're looking for. But the 65 to 75, this is soil temperatures. Microbes are at their peak activity between 65 and 75 degrees. They have fast nutrient cycling and they have maximum microbial diversity working. So it's the sweet spot for cool season grass. Now, once the soil temperatures start getting between 75 and 90 degrees, they're still active, but some of the microbes decline. Stress increases, oxygen availability matters more. So above 90 degrees, activity drops off, beneficial microbes can decline, soil biology becomes stressed out. So this matters because of nitrogen timing. At low temps, you apply nitrogen, microbes can't process it eventually. So because they can't process it, there's less uptake. And there's more of it maybe potentially leaching or running off. So because there's less uptake, there's more loss potential. So spring soil temperatures often are, around 45 to 55 in early spring and 55 to 65 in the mid-spring. And what that means is if you do earlier applications when the temperatures are a little lower, your microbes are going to have a slower response. They're not going to efficiently uptake or help the plant uptake the nutrients. And microbes control the nitrogen release, especially from organic matter and slow release fertilizers. So if microbes are slow, nitrogen is slow. So it's not saying you can't apply nitrogen, but if you do, you want to do it just really, really lightly. So root growth starts around 40 to 55 degrees, and the microbes become more effective between 50 and 55 degrees. So there's a gap, a window where roots want nutrients, but microbes aren't fully supplying them. So light, quick release nitrogen like urea works well in early spring. And I use urea all year round because it is quick, and I do fertilize almost all year round. So your lawn, it doesn't become active when the air warms up. It becomes active when the soil warms up. So this is another reason why you want to start monitoring some of your soil temperatures. So 55 or 50 degrees, microbes become active. 65 degrees, they're fully active. So the 65 degree range is the sweet spot. So if your soil is in the 40s still, your microbes, they're not doing much. That means your fertilizer isn't being used yet. So I have a camera set up outside. I haven't set it up on my program here, but the quick cheat sheet is below 40, they're dormant. They're not doing anything. 40 to 50, slow light applications of nitrogen. 50 to 65, activity begins and feeding begins. 65 to 75, peak. 75 plus is when you start getting a decline in the activity in the microbes. They start, they're just getting overheated. So microbial diversity shifts and some microbes decline. So the big misconception is microbes need to be fed in the summertime. And it sounds logical, but here's the issue. In most lawn, there's already plenty of carbon food in the soil, organic matter, root, and thatch. So adding some of these products, really isn't benefiting anything. They need water, oxygen, and temperature, not food. So here's what the research actually supports. Proven drivers of microbial health are soil moisture management, oxygen availability, organic matter content, temperature moderation, shade irrigation and timing, and what's not strongly supported: molasses application, sugar feeding, microbe boosters, or liquid carbon products. And the results of doing these sorts of things are going to provide inconsistent, short-lived, and often not measurable in turf quality. What can happen if you feed microbes and heat? Potential downside, and this is rarely talked about: adding carbon like molasses in hot conditions can increase microbial respiration, consume more oxygen, create temporary oxygen depletion. So hot, stressed soil is not ideal. So what actually helps your lawn in 90+ temperatures? Focus on watering management, deep, infrequent watering. If you have like deep roots, keep the soil from drying out completely. You need to get oxygen down in there and avoid watering or overwatering. Now, this is why I talk about watering and proper watering. If you know your plant's root structure better, like Kentucky bluegrass, shallower root system. So it's going to need definitely more frequent and light waterings, mostly in the morning up until around noon. That's what I normally do. When I have hot days, I set my water timer to start going off at 4 a.m. and then I'll have it go off again about 8. And I'm just talking just a couple of minutes, just enough just to get some water down on top of it, let it soak in a little bit, then add a little bit more, let it soak in a little bit. So the water's not just sitting on the grass blades, where you can start getting some issues with fungus and disease and that sort of stuff. You're just wanting to give it a nice light watering so that the moisture can kind of get down into the root area, the root zone. And I'll do a last watering at around 11. And only if it's an extremely hot day, I may water one more time in the mid-afternoon. And we're just talking 2 to 3 minutes, per cycle. For me, that's plenty to get the top of the soil moist, but it's also light enough to where that soil is going to absorb in, or that water is going to absorb into the soil and get down into the roots, and the roots are going to be able to utilize it before it starts getting stressed from the heat. And then what's going to happen is the ability for the soil to dry out a little bit more is going to be greater in between those times, and more oxygen is going to get down into your soil. And then you're going to hit it again just as that soil is drying out enough to allow the oxygen to get down into the roots. And then you're going to hit it with a little bit more water. It's going to cool the blades down. It's going to cool everything down. It's going to cool the soil down. Because remember, we're talking about, we want to keep those microbes in that sweet spot. And that's nothing above 75 degrees soil temperature. So I can only imagine if you're in like Texas or the South or anywhere where it gets really hot, it's constantly above 90 degrees, 100 degrees and stuff like that. It's really hard to keep your soil Cool. So I'm trying to bring it all back down into why watering is important, why frequent, shorter waterings are going to probably provide you better turf results than deep and infrequent. Because what's going to happen with deep and infrequent on the wrong types of grass, we're talking mostly, Kentucky bluegrass and perennial ryegrass, their root systems are a lot shallower. And even with tall fescue, this is going to happen. The soil, the microbes are going to start stressing out. They're going to start becoming inactive because the soil's dry, it's getting hot, there's no moisture, there's nothing cooling them down, okay? And they're getting plenty of oxygen and air and all that kind of stuff, but they're like, dude, man, I need some AC down here. It's way too hot for me. I can't do anything right now. I'm not processing any of your nutrients. I'm not doing any of that kind of stuff. And this is where the myth of people telling you, oh, you need to add this and you need to do that, to get your microbes, going and active and, increase their population. And that's just wrong, okay? A lot of people will tell you to add potassium when your grass is becoming stressed out from the heat. And it's just wrong. Potassium just has to be available to help deal with stress, okay? Because it's about the plant and the ability to create enzymes. Grass is a really, really great plant. It produces a lot of oxygen back into the air. It also burns a lot of carbon out of the air. So it has its own ability to cycle through its nutrients and work with the microbes in the soil to get the nutrients they need, because maybe there's no soluble nutrients available in the soil, but the plant can talks to the, I've talked about this before, the plants can talk to the microbes through chemical reactions and that sort of thing, creating different enzymes and acids and things like that. I forget which, I think it's amino acid. I've been doing too much study, so I'm not going to get too deep into that. But the plant will talk to the microbes and basically just say, hey, dude, I need more phosphorus. If you can get me some, that's great. If not, I got to start stealing from my older plant to start giving some growth to the new guys. And, that's the cycle that it goes through. And then what's going to start happening is if the microbes can't solubilize whatever unsoluble nutrients are in the soil, the plant's going to start showing signs of that deficiency. And that's when you're going to want to look into adding some of that. And then the basic keys to when you add nutrients, there's no reason to add anything more than a 4:1:2 NPK fertilizer. No reason. If it's anything more than a 4:1:2 ratio, you're basically just overdoing it. You're overloading your soil. And what happens is when there's, I used this analogy before, when your gas tank's full, you can't add any more gas to it. It's just going to overflow. It's the same thing with your soil in basic terms. Your soil is going to become too rich in those nutrients, phosphorus and potassium, and it's going to start leaching, it's going to run off. It just becomes wasteful. It's just a waste of money because your plant can't use it. The plant's going to use the potassium and phosphorus based on the nitrogen. The nitrogen is going to work with the microbes and the roots and the plant to uptake phosphorus and potassium as needed. Grass really doesn't utilize much of either of them, so there's no reason to add a bunch of it. And then on top of that, talked about this before, I am not a person to talk about the environment. You do what you want to do, but the biggest thing about phosphorus use is too much in the environment. It runs off, it gets into the waters, and it does all kinds of damage to waterways, lakes, ponds, and all that kind of stuff, just with algae growth and bacteria and stuff like that. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's why the government stepped in. And my reality is that I'm only trying to pass this information on to people who don't know this. You've probably never heard that phosphorus is a regulated compound or chemical nutrient that you put in your yard. Your state probably has a restriction on its use, you know. And then a lot of people start talking about using Milorganite, and it has less phosphorus, but it's a bioorganic material. So of course it has phosphorus in it, but the big thing about the organic fertilizers is they have a higher rate or risk of adding PFAS to your soil, which, those are the worst type. I'm not going to get too deep into that because that's another topic on another video I want to talk about, because that's kind of where I'm starting to go with my research and my talking about getting deeper into nutrients and that sort of stuff for your grass. Okay, but the key thing and the key point here right now is that everybody tells you using organic is so great, and it's great for the environment, great for your lawn, great for everything else. Well, synthetic nutrients aren't adding PFAS to your soil, but an organic fertilizer is more likely to add some sort of PFAS, which PFAS are bad for the environment. And I'm going to get into that more later. So these are the things I just really wanted to talk about. I'm trying to dive deeper in for everybody. I'm trying to help people understand a little bit more about, how your soil is reacting to what you're doing to it, how the microbes are reacting to it, and then also how your grass is reacting to it. Everything, it's just a big circle. So I just want to help you understand that, because I'm just tired of hearing all these YouTube guys talking about just dumping this in, dumping that in. I just saw another one of those videos. It actually was from like last year or something like that. Everybody's, I think, heard of, or maybe you haven't, but there's like a great, product out there. There's a couple of YouTubers that have come up with their own nutrient products that are like the greatest thing in the world. And this guy's talking about, oh, I just bought this, it's a $70 bottle of this great stuff, and it just came out, and you put it down and it instantly, makes your lawn turn green and does all this great stuff and yada, yada, yada. And I mean, it's fine. If that's something you want to use and you want to spend your money on that, that's great, because yes, it's going to do all that kind of stuff. But the products that I use and that I talk about using are half the cost. I'm going to probably last you 8 to 10 times longer than that one bottle that you spent $70 on. So you got to think about what you're putting into it, and you got to think about what is it that's in this bottle that's making my grass turn green. The only things that are going to make your grass turn green are nitrogen, iron, manganese, and sulfur. You need to have sulfur to help the nitrogen work with the microbes and the solubility of the nitrogen into the plant. That's how you're going to get your growth and your green. Your iron is just another micronutrient that's going to help green your lawn as well. Magnesium is going to provide some greening in certain circumstances. And then, like I said, sulfur, it's more of a pH type of a thing to help the soil at the root tips lower the pH, so iron availability and solubility is greater. Because iron is one of those really tricky and complex and detailed things where everybody thinks that just because you put iron on it and as soon as you spray it on, it turns your grass green, that it's working. And that's not what's happening. Yeah, you can spray iron on your lawn and it's going to turn your lawn green pretty instantly, but it's not because it's actually the plant taking that iron in and turning the grass green. That process doesn't happen that quickly, okay? It's a lot about oxidation, staining, those sorts of things on your grass. So yeah, put iron on your grass, especially liquid iron. It's going to give you instant results. If you got a party coming up and you want to, get your grass going, you want to put iron and nitrogen. Yeah, you could go buy the $70 bottle of liquid and spray it on your lawn, and it's going to do the same thing. But if you just buy a bag of urea, $35 for 50 pounds, and you just buy a bag of ferrous sulfate heptahydrate with sulfur, without sulfur. I use without sulfur because I try to control the pH of my soil for moss. But those two products, you buy a 50-pound bag of each of those and you mix it up in a spray mixer and spray it on your lawn. It's going to give you as good, if not better results than that $70 bottle of fertilizer. How do I know? That's what I do. That's all I use on my lawn. I've been doing it for 3 years, and I'm in Western Washington, so I don't really have a low CEC soil where the nutrients aren't, the soil's not, bleaching out or not able to retain the nutrients. I have a really good balanced CEC, a good soil. So my soil has the ability to retain nutrients better. But on top of that, just the activity of the microbes constantly doing their thing, composting and thatch and, leaves and, putting my grass blades back into my soil, into my yard. All those sorts of things are just helping that microbial population be active and do their job of creating and making soluble nutrients for your plant, because those are basically the only things you need to do to help your plant get nice and healthy. I'm going to go ahead and cut it there. I'm sorry I had some of these issues with my live. I've said this before, I don't do lives to be some, I don't even know what they call it, influencer or whatever. I don't ask people to like and subscribe. I'm just trying to help people get the information. Now, of course, if you do like, or you just throw a comment down, you are you're helping the channel and the content get out to more people, because that's how the algorithms work and stuff like that. And I'm only trying to reach people that are newer to lawn care, newer to wanting to start a yard, a lawn, and that sort of thing, because I'm just trying to help people out to understand the actual reality. You don't need to spend a bunch of money to keep your lawn looking nice and green. You can do it with minimal products, and I want to help show the signs that you need to look for in your grass to be able to notice that you're having some sort of deficiency. I put my test results up here. This is of my backyard. This is one I did late last year. And I only put it up just because, we've been talking about soil tests, and this is a Malic 3 soil test. And this is the only kind of test you should be looking at getting. And I'm only bringing this up because if you want to do a soil test, there's nothing wrong with doing a soil test. Do you really need to do one? If you don't really know any of these numbers, yeah, you probably might want to do one, because here's that important number right here, CEC. My backyard CEC is higher than my front yard. And I've actually done more work in my front yard with composting and sanding and all that sort of stuff. And it's like an 11.5 or something like that. And my backyard is what, a 16 or something, I think it says here. Yeah, 16.5. So it's actually a more clay soil. So I mean, I guess that actually kind of makes sense because I don't do as much back there. But that's what you want to know. You want to know the CEC number, and you want to know this pH number right here. The rest of this stuff, I don't even care. I'm not even going to do anything about it. I don't care if it's high. I don't care if it's low. I don't care. It's going to happen. Okay. And unless my grass starts telling me that it needs help with one of these two things, I mean, look at my potassium right here. I believe this is parts per million. I can't remember. I don't know if I changed the numbers. I'm not actually sure what these numbers are right here, right now. It says my potassium is on the lower side of the range. And it says my phosphorus, I'm sorry. My phosphorus is on the lower side, and my potassium is, about the mid. Neither one of them is hurting. But I don't even care. I'm not even going to do anything about it. I'm going to do something about it when I start seeing issues in my lawn, because you know what, if your lawn starts going into deficiencies of these nutrients, as soon as you add these nutrients, it's going to take just a couple of days for your plant to react and start repairing, okay? Your grass isn't going to die. You're not going to kill it off. Once you see it, you notice it, and you treat it, it's going to be fine, okay? Your grass will recover great from a deficiency in one of these two nutrients. As far as the other nutrients that this test is going to show you, I don't even care about those. You know, micronutrients, doesn't matter. The last thing I want to make sure you see on this test is actually what you don't see. You don't see any nitrogen reading. And the reason why you don't see a nitrogen reading is because nitrogen is one of the most difficult nutrients to be able to measure in your soil, because it constantly is changing from ammonium to nitrate to evaporating to oxidizing to just, it's always changing form. And because of that, you can't measure it, okay? But it's also actively being used. It's one of the most used nutrients by the plant. And because of how nitrogen just works through its changing forms from ammonium and nitrate, and from it being oxidizing and evaporating, and there's another word I'm looking for, but it's escaping me right now. But nitrogen is one of the most important nutrients to put in your lawn, and probably the only nutrient you need to put in your lawn. Add a little iron to kind of help everything green up a little bit with the nitrogen, and everything's going to be fine. You do the Malic 3 though. Do not do the My Soil test or any test that's like it. Yard Mastery, the other guy that does his live show and tells you to do soil tests. If you're doing a soil test and you're adding your soil to a little cup of water with a little pouch inside of it, it is the most useless test you can do to your soil. You might as well go buy that kit at Lowe's or Home Depot where you put the different little drops in it and stuff like that and let it sit. That kit's probably going to tell you more about your soil than those tests, okay? Those tests are all about trying to sell you products. They want to get you, and they want to start telling you, oh, your soil's, you know, it doesn't have this, it needs this product, and they're trying to sell you a 50-pound bag of something to put on your lawn, you know, probably for twice as much as you need to spend. And fine, if that's the route you want to go, and those are the, you know, the things you want to follow, you're allowed to do that. You know, those tests, they provide those tests for a reason, mainly to get your money, but that's up to you. You got that money to spend, go ahead and spend it that way on a test that's really going to give you, you know, bad results, okay? Your local extension office will probably provide a Malic 3 soil test for free. Just check with your county. Do a Google search for your local state extension office for turf grass. You're also going to find a lot of helpful things that are going to talk about your area and the types of things you can do in your area to maintain your grass properly. You know, what kind of nutrients, actually the weed populations too, and how to help prevent the weeds and cut down on the weeds, and, you know, even what sort of products you may want to or put down at different times of the year. So your local extension office is very, very important tool to being able to grow great grass. Unfortunately, I kind of feel that watching a lot of these really big YouTube lawn care channels is probably one of the worst things you can do these days, because all it's going to do is get you confused and get you spending a lot of money on products you don't need to spend. And, you know, I learned that long ago. I was a victim just like you, and I'm not a victim anymore. I've done the research, I've read the research papers, I'm following the science behind how to take care of turf grass and your soil. And I'm just trying to help everybody understand that, okay? So that's it for this week. I didn't plan on doing this. I have some things I'm working on. I believe that live is pretty much the thing I'm gonna do these days, just with mows and all that kind of stuff, and just talking about lawns and grass. And the only reason I'm going to do lives is I just really have a hard time putting out videos and doing editing on videos. It's easier for me to do a live and cut out some snippets here and there of some information and just post those in smaller clips. And you know, doing a live on Sunday morning, I mean, I need something to do on Sunday morning. I don't want to sit around and watching TV and stuff like that and, you know, just wasting my time. I would like to be learning something or doing something productive. So I get up and I do this, and I know this is the kind of content I would watch on a Sunday morning. People talking about real science and real things you can do in your yard. So anyways, thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.